Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our third session in the Digital Health Commercialization Seminar Series, which is being co-sponsored by the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health and the Brown Technology Innovations. My name is Allison Seeley. I am the project coordinator for educational initiatives at the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health, where one of our strategic priorities is helping to develop the future of the digital health workforce through programming and events like the ones that you're all joining us for today. So I'm going to be one of your moderators. I'll let our other moderator introduce herself in just a bit. In this seminar series, we are exploring the process of bringing digital health innovations to market. We've invited speakers who have expertise on intellectual property, regulatory pathways, market access, designing and evaluating digital health tools, and pitching a product. Whether you are someone who is ready to pursue commercialization or you are just considering the pathways for scaling your innovations, we hope that you'll take away some important insights through this series. If you are interested in staying up to date on upcoming programs or sessions, I'm going to invite you to join our listserv. So I'm chatting the link there. If you would like to stay up to date on all the news, any upcoming events and programs, that is the way to do that. I'll also let everyone know that we are recording today's session and we'll be sending the link out to registrants by tomorrow afternoon. So if you registered for this event, you will also get a link to the recording. But at this point, I will pass it over to my co-moderator to introduce herself and our guest.
Thanks, Allison. Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Simon, and I'm a Business Development Director with Brown Tech Innovations, the university's tech transfer office. So for today's session, we're thrilled to welcome Gregory from Precision Advisors. And I'm particularly excited to welcome Greg because Greg and I actually worked together for about 6 years at Precision and its predecessor, Insight Strategy Advisors. So this is like a reunion for me. So Greg is currently the Executive Vice President and Managing Director of Precision Advisors, a consultancy in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry that focuses on market access and commercialization. And Greg's areas of focus include rare disease and specialty products. He has a unique background. He spent about a decade in academia and then a decade over on sort of the commercialization side. So brings a very unique perspective to this topic. So welcome, Greg, and I'll let you take it from here.
Perfect. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Allison. So good morning, everyone. I guess good afternoon, as we're actually at 1 o'clock on the East Coast here. Thanks again for inviting me to talk today. As Melissa and Allison noted, I'll be sharing some perspective on commercialization within the digital health arena, specifically within the US. Lots of excitement in markets, but there's also a lot of challenges. So just before I get into some high-level introductions on a few things, just give everyone a sense for some of the things that we're going to be coming off on today. Do some quick intros I'll give you some background on myself. We're going to spend a few minutes just talking about digital health in general. So digital health overview. What does funding look like? How do we need to define this? Make sure we're all talking the same language. We're going to talk about value creation in the digital health space. What does that mean from a payer lens in particular, or from a provider lens? I find it, rather than trying to explain the healthcare ecosystem of the US within 60 minutes to everyone that's on the call, it's probably better for us to share some case studies from a digital therapeutic standpoint to kind of paint a picture for some of the opportunities, as well as some of the challenges that folks have had in the market. And then we'll kind of wrap up with commercialization considerations that in the way that we view things, and we'll get into some questions. So we'll hopefully leave some time at the end there for that. To start off with, well, why did Melissa call me? Like, what does this guy know about anything here? So a little bit about my story. As Melissa alluded to, so I spent, before I got into consulting, I actually spent a decade over in academia. So I did my PhD in immunology and molecular pathogenesis, eventually landed, I did my postdoctoral fellowship in hematology and oncology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So I've kind of bounced around over the years from University of Rochester to Emory to Northwestern and CHOP. And I really loved the work that I did from the bench side of things. But I wanted to get closer to the commercialization side, which many of you on the call may be thinking about, well, where's my place going to be in the future on that? And so this is really the proverbial bench to bedside story. I've done the bench for a long time. How do I get closer to that? And so after exploring a lot of different options over several years, including this being involved in the UPenn's Penn Biotech group, which is the student-run consulting group there. Made the transition over to life sciences, and specifically life science consulting. And so over the last 10, 11, 12 years or so, eventually landed myself at Precision. And so I think it's helpful just to kind of share with you guys a little bit about, well, what is precision, and when we think of commercialization. So I'm sure some of you maybe seen similar graphs in the past when we think of taking a product from initial idea, bringing it through data, bringing it through trials, bringing it through development, and eventually getting to say from some form of approval or getting it to market. Those first years are all costs, right? They're all sunk costs. We're spending money. We're trying to develop. But on the flip side of things, we get a commercially viable product. We're looking to bring that to market and start to make some money, making sure that patients are being able to get access to that. My organization, and we're about 3,000 FTEs in total, kind of across the globe here, has both a clinical arm and a commercial arm. So when we think about supporting manufacturers or innovators, we're thinking about from both angles when we go into this. So when we think of whether it's biomarkers, informatics, clinical trials, manufacturing, it's all things that sit on our commercial side, our clinical side of the organization. But then on the other side, we have our commercial teams. So when we think of data sciences, when we think of evidence, how do we communicate that evidence and engage with different customers, whether that's payers, whether that's providers, and whatnot. And so our main goal when we think about this is, well, are there things that we can be doing early on in development or through development that allows us to shift that curve a little bit sooner, so we can get products out to market, get them in the hands of providers, get them in the hands of patients sooner. And of course, for the innovators, what does that mean from a commercial standpoint? And so really the organization itself is really, we've kind of structured ourselves, so we're kind of driving that trajectory forward. Our teams within Precision, and I find this background helpful, so please ask questions as we go along. But our team's really been developed so we have specialists within unique areas. So when we think of say my team within Precision Advisors, we think about commercialization strategy. What are the analytics? What's the strategy that we need in order to help commercialize our products? But we also have different service lines within our organization when we think of well, how do we market this and educate physicians and patients and KOLs? How do we develop the health economic and outcomes and evidence that we need there? I'm also happy to say, look, when we think of we've really got a really special team. So when we think of a lot of folks that are on our teams have advanced degrees. We've got a lot. We actually have 25 former payers that are on staff. So when we want to understand, well, we've got a new product, whether it's a small molecule or whether it's a biologic or whether it's a digital therapeutic, even just being able to go and pick up the phone and speak to someone who used to sit on the payer side, just a few years ago is great. The other piece I think that it is worthwhile mentioning when we think of that special team, I'm actually very proud to say that we have several Brown alum on my team in particular, and I think we have Alex Adia, who's actually worked with some of the folks in the digital health on research side of things, and in the past, as well as Courtney Palm, who's a consultant with our team. All right, so this is a little bit of background on Precision, my background of where we're coming to on this. But I wanted to start with, well, what do we even mean when we talk about digital health? Where's the funding coming from? Are we on an upward trajectory, downward trajectory? And one of the organizations that I really like to follow, I guess a plug for them, is Rock Health. Now they're more so looking at from a venture perspective, but they've been doing a great job of tracking what does the funding look like within the US and the global scale of here. And so with the information that we have here, you can see the total number of what the funding looks like, as well as the number of opportunities and the average deal size. And you can see, even just between 2020 and 2021, it's almost doubled. which is incredible to see. I think the pandemic with COVID probably helped accelerate some of these pieces. But we know that there's a lot of interest out there in the market in regards to the digital health side of things. It's also important for us to consider, well, where is that funding going? And I'm going to share, this is something also from Rock Health, last Rock Health slide that I'll share today. But they've done some great categorization and looking at where is the funding going. So is it going into supporting R&D? Is it more on demand healthcare, telehealth solutions? Is it for fitness and wellness? The area that I'm in particular interested in is like in the treatment of disease. And like when we think of new therapies or new digital therapeutics or medicines, how do they help us better there? And so when we think over on the right hand side, where are people focusing? Probably a lot of known suspects here. Mental health being one of the big ones. What's really interesting here is when we think of the ability to translate cognitive behavioral therapies and transitioning them into more of like an app-based iteration that allows us to reach more patients is really exciting. A lot of funding that's going on there. But we also see things happening in oncology, musculoskeletal with PT, for instance. So a lot of excitement that's going down there. I'm sure, like for those everyone that's on the phone, seeing a lot of topics that may or may not be of relevance for them here. It's also important for us to ensure that we're defining digital health, innovation in a similar language, because digital health can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. The Digital Therapeutics Alliance came up with a defined nomenclature a few years back that we like to essentially level set with everyone. Digital health can be very all-encompassing. When we think of more so just digital health, these can be technologies or platforms or systems that engage consumers for lifestyle, wellness, health-related purposes, but those that may not necessarily have, evidence or clinical evidence that actually goes along with that. It's more like, hey, sounds like a good idea, and we think that people are going to benefit from this out there. As you start to move from left to right, when we start getting into digital medicine, there starts to be some level of evidence or hardware products that start to be involved. They may not be a therapeutic, but they may help with overall treatment options that we do have out there for patients. And on the far right-hand side, digital therapeutics. This is where we start to think about evidence-based therapeutic interventions to prevent or manage or treat medical disorders or diseases. These require a lot more data, a lot more evidence, and even like the regulatory pathways that they go through, it's going to be different on here. Where I focus is more so on the right-hand side here, digital therapeutics, to a certain extent, digital medicine. Some of the work for instance, like Courtney Palm, who I mentioned before, we've worked on like AI platforms that have linked to biomarker and diagnostics on this, which technically are going to fall into the digital medicine space. Any questions from folks on the phone in regards to like how they kind of think about digital health, within the Brown ecosystem here? And feel free to add questions in the chat.
Can I just voice my question?
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. This is a great session so far. So where would you put digital diagnostics in this? I know that it might go into digital therapeutics section, but why we don't have a separate category?
It's a good question. We're trying to be everything to everyone on there. I would personally put it in the digital medicine side of things. You could, depending on where it ultimately goes, if it starts to get into like the therapeutic side, oftentimes like we're seeing some of the diagnostic pieces that we have out there, if they're tied to a treatment as well, sometimes they can, for instance, in oncology, you can start to put them more under the therapeutic side of things. But I think it's a good call out, Small. And I don't know if like we're ever come to a full alignment, because I think there's always going to be that that new innovation that is coming out, like, and where exactly does it fit? And like that bottom bullet that bottom box that I have there, understanding where your product or your product concepts are going to fit ultimately. It's really like this categorization impacts your commercialization approach and the overall opportunity, and who's reimbursing. Right. And if we're on the digital therapeutic side of things, and we'll be getting to this a little bit later, it's easier from a health plan or from a payer perspective, whether that's Medicaid, Medicare, commercial, for this to be captured more at the, say, on a pharmacy benefit, and you just pay a copay, or on a medical benefit. When it starts to get into the hands of, okay, this is something that's going to help providers, that's a different reimbursement model. And we have some examples of what does that look like from like supplemental payments that a provider group may look for to essentially to make themselves whole if they're going to be using some of these different solutions. Okay. And so when we think of value creation in digital health on here, bit of a text heavy slide, but there's a few pivotal questions when we think of trying to boil everything down into a simple piece. If we have an initial product concept, it could be great, it could be very early concept on here, but we want to try to think about three main buckets here. Unmet need. What's the gap between the clinical unmet need that we're trying to address and the product profile? It could be like your product profile, you haven't figured everything out, quite yet. But we have to understand that. So like, in order to make sure that we're, looking at that greatest opportunity that's there. And at the bottom, question that we have, how can the product support stakeholders throughout the healthcare value chain? And this is going to differ, as I was kind of mentioning a minute or two ago. Is this benefiting payers? Is this going to be benefiting, integrated delivery networks or health systems or providers, or could be just helping patients or consumers, which is all okay, but we need to understand those dynamics because that starts to feed into payer value creation. What are the types of value transfer that must occur between a digital health asset and a payer to support monetization for your asset, and this could be as simple. And I use simple loosely on this, but what's the evidence? What are the clinical outcomes? Do they actually need to see reduction in provider visits or hospitalizations or ER? Seeing fewer ICU admissions, seeing enhanced compliance and adherence that's out there. And from a payer lens, the concept, they get it. What they're always going to want, they want the proof. They're going to want to see it as, okay, in the real world that you're actually reducing that. And it's like, hey, they don't want to necessarily pay for something and find out, hey, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't in the real world. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. How much do you invest on? I mean, if you have to go down the path of doing a randomized clinical trial just to show the efficacy of your product on there, the time horizon for bringing them to launch is a lot longer. And on the last piece here, end user value creation. What are the types of value transfer that must occur between digital health asset and the end user or prescriber? And when we think of digital therapeutics when we think of therapeutics in a conventional sense, we typically think of well the patient, right? That's all that matters at the end of the day. But a lot of the digital innovations that are coming out, we have to be thinking about the prescriber, the providers, the nurses, the health systems, because there's value that they can extract out of this as well as the patient. And so how are we going to tell that story? How are we going to get them to want to adopt that? So we may have say payers on board in that middle bucket. Yeah, they get it. But if we don't have a good story that providers want to adopt it, that providers, if say it takes them 10 more minutes a day, they're going to use that digital therapeutic in their practice or that digital platform, but they have to, and it takes 10 more minutes of their time. you have 1,000 patients, all of a sudden, over the course of, a few months, that's a lot of hours that's being added into the system. How do they get reimbursed for that? And so when we think of what evidence do we want, a lot of experts have kind of weighed in on this. One of the ones that I like to refer to comes from the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, based on a review that they did a few years back, and specifically looking at opioid use disorder on here. And so you may say, like over on the left-hand side, a clinical efficacy, great. I've shown that it does what it says that it does. But what we find that the devil's in the details for this, and what we've kind of referred to, that dossier of evidence that are requirements. And I'm gonna kind of like walk you guys through 7 different topics that are there here, but there's probably another 20. But these are the big the buckets that are on there. So one, just thinking the durability of beneficial clinical effects. So we may show, yeah, it works when the patient is using it. Does this cure the patient? Do they still need to keep on using this? Do they relapse, or do they start to have issues? Again, say if we're looking at mental health, 3 months down the road, can I reuse it with that patient, or not? When we think of the durability, that extends the amount of study that you're doing, the amount of evidence you're looking at. When you think of impact of healthcare utilization, this is probably one of the biggest ones that everyone wants to be able to quantify. If I'm going to have a digital therapeutic or some form of digital intervention that's better than what I have right now, is this replacing a therapy that I currently use? Or is this is a patient not going to need particularly a prescription medication anymore? Am I going to see cost savings on my budget? And as much as we want to think that that payers can just make sure that we have the best quality of care for everyone, there is that trade-off from a budget side of things. So understanding from a health economic standpoint what that looks like, really important. Impact on clinician productivity. I kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago. If some interventions are actually meant to help make clinicians more effective at what they do. But at the same time, we have to understand, if we're integrating a new platform or therapeutic, but that involves a nurse having to log into a platform and monitor how our patient's doing, because maybe there's a feedback element within that. What does that mean from a productivity standpoint for those patients, for the nurses and physicians that are there? Usability as measured by clinician and patient experience. Are people actually using it? And so while we may have in concept that people want to use it, how long are they using it for? We actually see a lot of contracts written like earlier on with some of the smaller digital companies when they're trying to get these out here. I want to see that people are actually using it and how they're using it, and that's going to be a measure of the contract as well. Security of the IT components. This is not one necessarily that I focus on, but you are getting a lot of data, and when we think of patient de-identified information, it's got to be protected. Where's the data going? How are we going to make sure that it stays clear? How are you tracking that over time? Is it going to be applicable to a diverse patient population, as well as customers or health systems on here? This is a harder one to get to. You may argue, well, I've got a great concept, I've got clearance from the FDA, I'm going to go and do a pilot now with a health system or a specific geography, and I'm going to focus all my efforts there. Great, but are the people? Are the level of sophistication, are the beliefs of everyone within that geography, is it applicable when we look at one state to the next? More often than times, it's not necessarily being 100% applicable. So how do we make sure that you've got that flexibility built in? And then this scalability to larger populations, depending on what we're looking at. And what we often see is that folks they'll get the clinical efficacy story down, but the level of the evidence that they have maybe early, or maybe like only based on say one trial, or more so based on other elements, and they may have elements of what number 1 through 7. But if they haven't checked the box, or they haven't gotten the appropriate feedback from providers, from patients, from payers, we see instances where like, yep, hey, their revenue, their forecast looks great, but when folks aren't checking the box, we're seeing things not go as well. It kind of points to like almost like the long slog that folks often have in the digital therapeutic space. You get approval, and then you're waiting years and years and years to continue to generate the evidence such that payers may want to consider adding you and reimbursing for the product. Okay, so let's jump into a few case studies on here, and I think that this starts to paint a little bit of a picture of what's going on with some recent launches when we think of this space. And the 4 that I'm going to be talking to you guys about, high level, we're going to be talking about pair therapeutics, Reset and Reseto. We're going to be talking about Viz.ai. We're going to be talking about Kili as well as Arexo. All publicly available information that we have on here. I'm sure folks on the phone have dug into some of these products in the past as well. But Pair Therapeutics, actually one of the kind of groundbreaking organizations that had their first prescription drug therapeutic approved, which was Reset. Now this was approved back, and I almost like it's amazing to think this, but it's back in 2017. So almost 5 years ago at this point. It's a 90-day PTD, or a prescription drug therapeutic for substance use disorder. It's intended to provide cognitive behavioral therapy. So I kind of mentioned that before. They figured out a way to show that they can move CBT over into like a new platform for patients. They followed up about a year later with a 84-day PTD for opioid use disorder. Similar story on there. Now they received it in 2017 and 2018. Now what's interesting, right? I mean, from like how's it reimbursed? And this is where when you think of pharmaceuticals or biologics, assuming that you've got a fairly you've got a pretty good FDA clinical FDA approved product, you've got great clinical trials, payers are typically starting to reimburse anywhere between 4 to 10 months, or at least making a decision that they're going to reimburse, put you on formulary, so you can go down to your CVS, your Walgreens, and you can fill that prescription. That's not necessarily what we're seeing in the digital therapeutic space. It's a little bit more of like trench warfare to a certain extent, where they're having to go and fight for that access within every single payer. So right now, Reset, for instance, for that 90-day prescription, it's $1,665. Their value prop, when they think of, well, like, why do we justify that price? I mean, they have data, that shows, okay, well, we are lowering overall healthcare spending by reducing ER visits and hospitalizations, totaling about $21,050, per patient that they have on there. So, they came out at a lower price point, assuming like, all right, well, you can adopt this, but I'm not just completely replacing your cost with a different therapy. You're also going to need some savings that are there to the system. Now, it's been 4 or 5 years since their approval, and they're still fighting the good fight to get access. Just a few months ago, they Mass Health has agreed to be the first Medicaid program to cover it coming up into the next cycle here. It's a pretty big step for them. We've seen other commercial payers that have started to adopt this into their digital formularies that they have. One of the other ones also from end of last year that I find particularly interesting, because it's more of a value-based agreement. And I like, for those who sit on the pharmaceutical side of things, you hear a lot about value-based agreements. Like, well, all right, pay you this much, but I expect your drug to do A, B, and C for me. And that's what they've essentially done here with Prime Therapeutics, which is one of the the larger payers that are out there. And their agreement is really based around, they're looking at hospital inpatient stays. So they actually want to see, like, I'm assuming payer came to the table, you should see X reduction. All right, well, we're going to hold you to that. Total healthcare costs, you're going to see this amount of healthcare costs by all the patients that are using this. They're going to measure that. And then the physician engagement, what's the overall level of satisfaction that we have there. So how are they doing so far, right? So by summer of 2021, about 4 years out, right? They've seen about 20,000 prescriptions written. Now, is that high? Is that low? When you think of like 4 years out, I'll leave that to the eye of the beholder that's there. But I will say, okay, they've been slow and steady, and they actually had a major inflection point just back in December where they finally went public, being listed on NASDAQ after they did a merger with ThimblePoint on there. So again, all very promising stuff for payer, but it kind of shows the example. It's a good example of slow and steady, building their case, showing the evidence so they can go to payers with this. Any questions on this before I jump onto the next example here? Okay. One of the next ones is a little bit different. We had the question earlier on. This one actually might be a little bit more relevant for you here. This one isn't necessarily a digital therapeutic, but more of a to support on the prescriber, or the prescriber side of things. So VizAI is as many of you may know, stroke's the #1 cause of long-term disability. But if you identify it early enough, there's treatments, and you can kind of reduce the cost and impact to the patient that's there. VizAI is actually has a stroke software, and what they've been able to do in their pilots and their studies and demonstrate to CMS, which means Medicare, is a significant reduction in time to treatment and improved clinical outcomes in patients suffering stroke. So essentially, this is trying to address all the logistical hurdles, within a health system that prevents from a patient initially perhaps having an issue to actually talking to the doctor and doing what exactly they need to be doing for this patient. So their value proposition over on the right-hand side, they're able to show, all right, I can save you time, I can increase access to care for those patients, and I can show improved outcomes. Now, VizAI, they had de novo clearance from the FDA in February of 2018. Not much happened, over the next 2 years. But one of the groundbreaking pieces, and it's actually the first AI that's ever gotten anything like this, Medicare granted them a new technology add-on payment. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on how Medicare determines how much they pay, pay everyone, but essentially this is a program that CMS has put in place to incentivize adoption of new technologies and ensure that physicians don't view it as well, I'm going to get paid, $800 to do this procedure, and the way that Medicare will determine how they're going to be paying you, they look back at claims over the last few years. With new payments, they don't have that history, and so if I'm a doctor and I want to use a new innovation, I've got to decide, well, am I just going to eat the cost, or am I going to not do it? And so the NTAP program is meant to make sure that those really innovative products have it. So any stroke center that's using this now can get up to $1,040 per use in patients with suspected strokes. So we think a value proposition for these centers: one, they're able to provide better care. Two, they're also having another revenue stream that is coming in. I mean, if they had 1,000 patients in a larger stroke center, that's an additional revenue that is coming in for them. Starting getting into two products a little bit, too early to tell on where they'll go. So Achilles, back in 2020, got approved for Endeavor RX. And I call it too early to tell because they're still in those early stages, right? They're not even 2 years, out from approval. It's an FDA authorized medical device, has to be prescribed by a healthcare professional. But it's really first of its kind because it is, trying to help out kids with ADHD between 8 to 12 years old. It's delivered through an immersive game. Got a little snapshot there over in the bottom. And really through sensory and motor stimuli, those the therapy targets areas of the brain that plays a key role in attention function there. Their value proposition, like they look at 68% of parents reported improvements in ADHD related impairments, more or better attention scans, no side effects, where on the pharmaceutical side of things you may see side effects that's there. Right now they're taking more of a predominantly a cash model. Now that might not be forever on there, but right now that's the option that they have. From a list perspective, it's $450 for a 3-month prescription, and it is a prescription. It's available through an exclusive pharmacy partner. So this is not something you can just walk down to the CVS with a script in hand. On there, you've got to go to a special pharmacy that you're gonna have to call into. They do have patient assistance programs. This is very common on the pharmaceutical and biologic side of things, but they also have a patient assistance programs to reduce costs for some folks. But a lot of this is they're looking to continue to gather information. Now they do hope, is my assumption, that they're eventually going to start to get some payers that are buying into this and want to provide this to parents and to kids, but they're early on at this point. Last one I'll talk about, Vorvida. This one, a little bit of a different story. In addition to the access challenges that they have, they're learning as they go. And this is from what we gather from their investor calls. They're even thinking well, what's the right way to go to market for this? How do we market this? And which channel should they go through? So Vorvida from Orexo, really they refer to it as a private and personalized online program that can help consumers change their behavior around alcohol. In clinical trials, it's shown that it can get people to drink less alcohol in as little as 3 months. And it was initially made available in the U.S. market in July of 2020. They launched with a direct-to-consumer model. Upon approval, there was an option to buy it for about $750 for 6 months of access. Now that was paying cash. Right? This is not covered by payers at this point in time. So this is $750 cash on there. They subsequently reduced it to $599 after doing some price sensitivity research with patients and caregiver and families and whatnot there. And even then they've also taken another discount. So our current price right now is $359.40. And we've seen this behavior in other digital health products in the past as well. I mean, Propeller Health, we saw some of this as they're looking to get adoption out in the market. And one of the important things to call it, that last bullet there, they're offering consumers a money back guarantee. So if you use it for less than 60 days, you're not completely satisfied. They want people to be able to take a chance on this and see how things go. So from what we understand, they're starting to continue to explore what options do they have from a revenue perspective, and do they need to be thinking about their marketing. Their investor call from last month, talked a little bit about their direct to consumer marketing that they have done. It's hard to make that scalable. So they're actually moving to partnerships with more established players like Walgreens, or even Trinity Health, which is a health system, or SoberGrid on there, in order to make it more scalable to patients and increase awareness that are out there. So again, another one of too early to tell, but it just kind of speaks to the challenges launching digital therapeutics into the market. Sometimes, depending on the regulatory pathway, I sometimes refer to these as almost like you're launching a drug without doing a clinical trial. If you're not careful on things. So just a few last slides here, as we think about, well, how should you guys be thinking about, your own products, right? You guys, you have your pitch, competition that is ongoing. You have, your own ideas that you're thinking. How do you start to boil this down as you're thinking? And the way that we like to think about, this really in three main buckets. And there's a lot of work that has to go into each one of these. So I'm not gonna necessarily be able to give you the answer, in 5 minutes on there, but we're thinking about, target customers, who's gonna use it? Is it the patients, is it providers, is it employers? Is it integrated delivery networks? For which patients? Do we actually understand which patients are going to use this? You may be surprised sometimes that the patients that you think that you'd like to use this are maybe not the ones that are actually going to use it in the market, or that would have the best like health economic outcomes from that. The value proposition, why will customers use, say, the app, for instance? What advantages does it have over, alternative therapies? How does it integrate into current systems or other value-based initiatives? This is, one that sometimes throws people off when you realize, like, I'd love to be able to integrate this app, for instance, or this, program bolted into my own system. I didn't build it like that. Or, Sutter Health is going to be different than Cleveland Clinic, and so you're not developing two different programs that are there. And finally, that business model. How are customers going to interface with the app? How will it be incorporated? What's the optimal revenue model here? We'll talk a little bit about that here. So when we think of target customers, and this can be kind of all over the place, right? Health systems, IDNs, national and regional health plans, pharmacy benefit managers, CMS. So thinking of Medicare and Medicaid on here. And the value proposition for each one of those may differ quite a bit. We also think about patients and employer groups. So just giving folks a little bit of a historical perspective, where the industry has moved over the last, say, 5 or 6 years. A lot of the digital innovation initially was thinking, I can just go direct to consumer. I'm going to go to patients, and I'll get mass volume going down that route. That was hard because like now you're looking at these massive DTC or marketing budgets to do commercials and just get the word out there. So folks started to switch over to employer groups. It's like, all right, well, maybe I can get the employers on board. They'll provide this as a new offering to all their employees that we have there. And maybe, it could be something that, reduces missed days of work or, reduces the overall expenditure. Well, that's great, but folks were finding themselves, every single employer was different. And they were having to essentially, different contracts with everybody on there. And it didn't get, it was very difficult to make it scalable. And then you have all these other digital companies that are all trying to do the same thing for these employers. So like, all right, we have to prioritize, we can't do everything. And so that's when you started to see a little bit of a shift in thinking to thinking about health systems, to providers, and to payers. How do we get coverage there to make it more scalable? From a value creation, framework perspective, I won't say that every single product that folks are thinking about that are on the phones will fit into this, but when we think of like where is your intervention ultimately going to sit, we have to be thinking like what are the building blocks of value, and what's going to then increase the value for those stakeholders. So when we think of hey, what clinical data is this going to be feeding into? Is this patient identification? We've worked with a lot of clients that have created predictive algorithms to help identify high-risk patients, and data looks pretty good, and they have a very good platform, but they don't know how to get it integrated into the health system, or it's going to be too costly for the ROI from the health system's perspective. Patient stratification. This story sits very nicely with population health dynamics. If there are new things that can be incorporated in there into things like Epic and Cerner. But eventually we know, hey, we have our actually intervention. It's it's approved, we're authorized for use. Do we have the appropriate clinical outcomes that's going to be meaningful to get reimbursed? And like, have we measured in the real world? What are the financial outcomes for those patients and those providers? Are we actually saving money, or are we just adding more money into the overall system? And then finally, just to think like, well, what are some of these pricing models or revenue models that we're talking about, Greg? And this really is all over the place, and this is just like a handful examples. Now, these could be one-time direct payments to the manufacturer, the innovator, flat fee or a per user fee, based on say app utilization or the time being used. We've seen subscription-based monthly direct payments to the manufacturer, again based on use. This can be boiled down to a what we refer to commonly in the payer space, PMPM, or per member per month. So like how many pennies is this adding into my overall cost, or per employee per month? Do we need to be thinking about this from a provider lens? Do I need to change my reimbursement to providers from a payer lens? Where a lot of folks on the digital therapeutics side have tried to do, we just reimburse this similar to like how you go to the pharmacy and you pay copay and you get access to that. That's the easiest way to go about doing this, but you have to have the data to back it up. And then finally, like value-based arrangements, which I kind of talked a bit about, what payer and prime are now doing. That's on there. But again, your product may deliver different value for different customers. And I think one of the big takeaways here is try not to be everything to everyone, like finding like your spot where you're going to go and focus on, and making sure you're getting the evidence that you need in order to support that. And that's really everything that I had, to kind of talk to. I'm more that we have about 12 minutes left. If there are questions that folks that would like to ask here, and a big thank you to folks. If you wanted to reach out with any questions, I bravely put my email on there, but always willing to entertain. And also but those more so on the student side of things, if you listen, we're hiring. If you're interested in like how do you want to jump all the way over onto the understanding and commercialization of digital therapeutics, feel free to reach out. But Melissa and Allison, I'll hand it over to you to kind of coordinate here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Greg. Floor is open for questions, so feel free. Well, Allison, I wrote it in chat, but feel free to type or raise your hand or just unmute yourself. All right, Mariana, if you'd like to go.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really great presentation. I'm curious more, especially because you've mentioned usability a number of times. And I feel like that's an area where there's not a whole lot of data to see, of all of the entire patient population could be eligible for, digital therapeutic or other type of solution. What data have you seen that shows, you have to imagine there's some kind of threshold out there that whether it's payers or providers are looking at of, okay, if we do provide this to our patient population, we want to know that at least 60% will actually adopt and do the full treatment. So I don't know if you have any resources around that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I have not honestly seen like for folks that have done like the studies to look at this, and the reason being when they see high utilization, folks are more than happy to publish it and put it out there as a white paper. When they don't see that, it's mom, they're not saying anything on it. So they're not gonna say, like, yeah, our product didn't get used. That's just gonna be like a death blow, from a commercialization standpoint. So it's kind of a little bit of a conundrum for some of the manufacturers on that side. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm glad I'm not the only one who's had a hard time finding that data.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, we'll see, like, folks that we'll try to get more to that information, say, rather than like an RCT, but like do a pragmatic clinical trial design. And we've seen, different studies, and, there is one, I'll see if I can dig it up and then perhaps share it through Melissa and Allison, but that actually looked at some of these pieces. But in the pragmatic clinical trial designs, they'll actually look at some of that, the usability, piece.
Cool. Yeah, if you're able to share that, that'd be really valuable. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. And Gendry, you're able, do you want to just
Home care.
unmute and ask your question directly?
Yeah.
It'd be easier.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for information. It makes sense in your opinion for like an AI subscription service for the home care setting. I looked at your chart and to me it makes sense to do like a per member per month. But I was also thinking like maybe to make it cheaper, like make the model like be charged each time it's used maybe, but like super inexpensive. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it depends on like what you have going there, like and who ultimately like we're looking to save money for who's paying for this. Home care gets interesting because there's a lot of different models that are out there. I actually had Gregory, I haven't actually thought about that one because like there's even like with some of the hospital-based home care models that are starting to come out. How would they be on the hook for this? But if we're thinking, from a payer, angle, when we think of home care where they're just trying to move people out of inpatient or outpatient, get them, home care there. And they find, a lot of cost savings by doing that. It's actually cheaper, to send a nurse out to the home than to have someone, come into the office or into like an outpatient, for a day. Big cost savings that are there. So if there are different, say, platforms that could help with that model, there's probably something that is there on it, but it probably come back down to like a per use perspective on there, unless there's very clear outcomes that you're showing on the back end.
Okay. Thank you so much. I see your email in there. Thank you.
Yeah, and Small.
Yes, hi, thank you. So my question is, let's say for a service that aims to identify high-risk patients for mental health conditions, can go from a different commercialization strategy from less regulated to more regulated applications, such as starting as a general wellness product direct to consumers, gathering real-world data, and then going through the FDA and clinical efficacy and everything, and trying to go into the reimbursement route and be integrated into the healthcare systems. Do you see any examples of it? Do you think that's a realistic strategy?
I think
what might be the hurdles?
Yeah, I think it's a level of control. Like, I mean, you can certainly go and get that level of information in the real world. But do you have the appropriate controls going into that to build it, to the FDA that they're going to like, yeah, I get it. This is a investigator-initiated trial, and we're showing the results that they have there. Yeah, so I think that it's a tricky one. I would say, like, without having the appropriate piece, and who's collecting the information, right? Like, is this patient reported versus we've seen other ones where like they're actually tracking information within the EMR. And they have essentially an AI algorithm that is, identifying patients that are high risk for, whatever disease or, exacerbation or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Andy, question from you?
Greg, great job. As we think about digital therapeutics in the conversation today, I guess I'd love to hear your perspective, bringing it up one level. Broader digital health, where does that fit with growing trend I see in pharmaceutical companies trying to figure out their equation with digital health in a virtual world? And just interested in where you see this going, I guess. And is there a play for pharma in addition to some of the therapeutics and medicine that we talked about? I've been doing this 20 years, and I think this idea of value beyond the medicine still is out there, and feels like you're much closer to it than me.
Yeah, no, like Andy, like you see, a lot of like the bigger pharma, but it gets buried in all the other, research, and R&D that they're doing. they're exploring these, but are they, would I say like they have a double down on it? They're usually viewing it as, are there digital therapeutics or digital interventions that could help to supplement and better support the patients that maybe I've already focused on? So say like I have like a blockbuster biologic. Are there other things that I could be doing for this patient to help them? Or are there things that I could be doing for the provider to help them identify the right patients that this would that product would be beneficial for? I've seen a lot of activity there. I think they're certainly cautious on. I think they see like the bullish nature from a venture fund perspective, but they also have the reality of like, hey, if we really want to make sure that we have the access that we need, we're going to need evidence, right? And so it's not a a quick 2 years we'll have a product and we'll be out there. But I think the more folks can understand like, hey, what the evidence is and how do you create that evidence. I mean, I had one client over the last few years where essentially we told them like, yeah, this is great. You need an RCT, randomized clinical trial. Doesn't need to be big, but show me it works in the real world. And they're like, they fought us tooth and nail. They eventually went and did it. And payers loved it afterwards. They're like, this is good. You've shown to me like with 400 patients that this product actually does what you were telling me you wanted me to go out on a limb for and believe that it did that.
Yeah, real helpful. Thanks. Yeah, it comes back to your earlier slide of just what's the value when we need to demonstrate it.
Yep. All right. We have 1 minute. Any other questions here?
I have one more quick question. What are the funding sources that you've seen for those early clinical trials?
It's coming from all over frankly, it's coming from all over the place. It's not necessarily manufacturers like when you think of your typical Pfizer's, GSK's, and whatnot. These are usually like on the venture side that are funding some of these smaller startups down that path. And we do see some that are a little bit more straightforward. They're still like on the academic side of things. And occasionally, Mariana, you will see. Gosh, I probably haven't seen as many of these as of late, but CMS used to allow for demonstration products or projects, and essentially like you going and pitching to CMS like, hey, I want to try this, and we're gonna integrate this digital innovation in here. We're gonna see if there's savings to Medicare on there. Definitely a long path to get to that as well.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
I think we've come to the end of our time. So Greg, thank you so much for your presentation today. And thank you to everyone for all the great questions. We have recorded the session, and so Allison will be setting out a follow-up link so anyone can access the recording if they'd like to reference it later. And our next digital health commercialization seminar will be on March 15th at 1 p.m. with Justin Soroyton from Octo PD, discussing evaluating feasibility, desirability, and viability of digital health products. And Allison has put the link to that registration in the chat. But thank you so much. And Allison, if you'd like to say any closing comments.
Yeah, thank you all so much for this great conversation. Thank you, Greg, for all of your wisdom and for answering those questions. We do appreciate your feedback, and so I've chatted a link to a survey to help us improve these seminars. We do want to continue to offer these kinds of opportunities for folks in the future. So with your feedback, we can hopefully continue to provide that kind of service. But again, thank you so much to everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll follow up via email with the link to the recording. Take care.
Thank you.